Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Scott Luton and special guest host Kelly Barner with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Scott. I'm always glad to be with you. And of course, I want to wish you happy wear your favorite light blue shirt day.
It's really a thing. It's on the calendar. It's on the global calendar, a national holiday at the very least. But kidding aside, big show here today as we're going to be interviewing the supply chain leader of an organization that has moved mountains in the last couple of years, leading a noble mission in a global battle against the pandemic. Kelly, should be an intriguing conversation, right?
Yes, I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot over the next bit of time.
Agreed. So with no further ado, I want to welcome in our newest friend, Jim Cafone, Vice President, Pfizer Global Supply Chain. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing well today, Scott and Kelly. Thanks for having me here today. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Well, we appreciate you carving some time out. I can only imagine, Kelly, how many full plates Jim's got, him and his team. But where we want to start, before we dive into our main topics here today, Jim, I want to get to know you a little better, right? So we like starting our conversations with, tell us where you grew up, where you're from, and give us some anecdotes about that upbringing.
Yeah, it's maybe I'll start off with, so I grew up small town in northern New Jersey, about 10 minutes away from Giant Stadium, 15 minutes away outside the Lincoln Tunnel, town called Bloomfield, blue collar town mostly. And spent a lot of time there till I was 17 and then went on to university.
Well, all right. So does that make you a Giants fan?
I'm always rooting for the underdog, and I think the Giant fans tend to be a little bit more elitist, so I'm a Jet fan.
The New York Jets. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. So one quick follow-up question. You left town to go to school. Where'd you go to school?
I went to University of Rhode Island. So I completely got out of semi-city living and then went up to the beautiful shores of the ocean in Rhode Island.
Man, Kelly, he paints quite a picture there, huh?
I know. And actually, Jim, I wanted to ask you, because I think I have this right. Is it true that in the whole state of New Jersey, you're not allowed to pump your own gas?
That is true. We are the only state, New Jersey's the only state that I guess you're still not allowed to do it. And nobody really understands why, but every time it gets brought up for a vote, for whatever reason, it still stands. So,
job creation.
So I had no idea, Kelly, the things you learn here.
Little factoids, yeah.
I've got some Googling to do this afternoon. But Jim, one final question about your upbringing from New Jersey to Rhode Island to wherever you are now. What was one food dish in the Cafone household that was inseparable from your childhood?
Growing up, I would probably say lasagna.
Okay.
With an Italian last name, that would be it. That was the one that you always look forward to when you came home and you and mom had made it. Yep, that was it.
Man, okay. Well, I know what we're having for dinner tonight, Kelly Barner, making me hungry. All right, so Kelly, we've gotten kind of a little bit about Jim's background. I'm sure there's a lot more there. We'll try to get to who knows what else might come out in today's interview. But where are we going next with Jim Cafone?
So we're going to talk a little bit about the bigger picture. So given the leadership role that not only supply chains, but also the pharmaceutical industry has been in over the last couple of years, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your past experience with leadership. Can you talk to us about one key leadership role that particularly formed your own worldview and maybe even impacted the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the secret to your question is that the word worldview, right? Mm-hmm. Worldview. So Probably one of the best roles I had from a global perspective. 2004 to 2007, I was responsible for, I was vice president of our European manufacturing and supply division at a company called Wyeth Pharmaceuticals. Wyeth was eventually purchased by Pfizer. But I think it was my first time in a significant leadership role outside the United States, living outside the United States, and having varying people in my organization where multicultural and multilingual, certainly. And, you know, the interesting thing about being in the United States versus Europe that always fascinated me is in the United States, you drive 100 miles, everybody still speaks the same language. You still see Target, you still see Walmart, you still see a lot of the same Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. When you drive, 100 miles or 100 kilometers in Europe, you could drive through 4 different languages in 6 different countries. It's amazing. Yeah. So that was probably one of the biggest assignments, my late 30s, early 40s, where I really learned a lot.
And you were stationed in Europe for that role.
That's correct. Yeah, it was one of the things, Kelly, when I was offered that role, I didn't want to be doing that role from sitting in the United States. Your classic American companies like to sort of give people responsibility for geographies outside the United States, but it's always better if you can immerse yourself in it. Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Time zones. And I think the other thing too is I think people appreciate more of, again, this is pre-COVID, of being able to see you in their time zone and visit, travel, those sorts of things. Yes.
Yeah. So now that we've sort of walked through your tour up to the current point, tell us a little bit. I mean, most people have heard of Pfizer, but if you would just start us by telling us a little bit more about how you describe Pfizer as a company, and then, of course, tell us more about your role there.
Yeah, so Pfizer, obviously it's one of the names nowadays that most, if not all, people know, right? Fortunately or unfortunately, due to a pandemic. But we are a company that is probably one of the largest, healthcare providers, manufacturers, and our purpose is breakthroughs that change patients' lives. Our goal every day, every Pfizer employee comes to the office with the intention of, or logging onto their computer these days, right? With the intention of, supporting a patient, and it's a pretty noble mission because each one of us, no matter who you are, always, fortunately or unfortunately, has, a patient around them, right? We all know a patient. The patient in some cases is ourselves, or it's a relative, or it's a child, or something along those lines. But that's really what our goal is. So, I can give you all the statistics. You can find it on Pfizer.com. Sales, products, all those great things. But that's really, Pfizer, what we are. Breakthroughs that change patients' lives.
Yeah. And how about your role?
So I'm the head of our worldwide supply chain. So in the supply chain world of plan, source, manufacture, deliver, I have responsibility for all the planning, and I have responsibility for all the delivery globally, including our sales order management functions. And then I have a peer of mine that does all of the procurement. And then I have multiple peers that do actually the manufacturing. In the Pfizer world, we don't just make vaccines, we make solid oral dose tablets. We do work in rare diseases like, in gene therapy. So we have a multitude of technology platforms. And it's my team is again responsible for the direct planning, and then also the delivery of those to our patients, the last mile.
I was really looking forward to meeting you here today, Jim, and learning more from your perspective, especially given the last few years. I had a chance probably about 10 years ago now, I think it was, to visit your Pfizer had a small operation at the time down in Albany, Georgia. And I think I said that right, Kelly. There's all kinds of ways we can pronounce different towns in our great state of Georgia, but It was fascinating to meet the leaders, to meet some of the team members, to see the operation. We led a small training class down there. And so fast forward now to everything that has transpired and to be able to meet, one of the global supply chain leaders. This is really a treat for a supply chain nerd like me. So where I want to dive into next, Jim, now that Kelly's really helped our listeners really level set with your background and kind of how you view clearly your priority. We just heard there, Kelly, is on the mission. I mean, I love that about a lot of supply chain practitioners. So I'm going to focus in. We all know the noble mission that the Pfizer team has been deeply immersed in, moving mountains. I mean, really doing some things that we never thought could be done just a couple of years ago, especially related to the COVID-19 vaccine. So a couple of questions for you, Jim. First off, given all the complexities involved, right? We were talking pre-show about, when you got a big problem, a lot of folks, I know I've done it before, you kind of admire the problem, you compliment the problem, you're kind of overwhelmed, and you never get to, doing something about it. So starting there, when it comes to, disseminating a COVID-19 vaccine, around the world, how did you and the team put the plan together initially?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, for me to really, I almost want to walk you back to, if I could, to, I guess it's early 2020, right? And if you could maybe, I want to kind of like put you into the, where we were at the time, right?
Sure.
So, in early 2020, basically what happened is the Chinese government, it was January 12th, uploaded the COVID SARS genetic sequence, right? Now, we, at the time, we're starting to see quite a lot of patterns around the world because of the broad-based portfolio we have. You start to see ordering patterns change, right? You start to see certain categories start to see a tremendous amount of uptake. And a lot of it was for our hospital emergency rooms settings, right? So January, early February, we started to see that. We also have, manufacturing operations in China, and we started to get early hand, on what was happening, right? So Pfizer as a company knew that it wanted to contribute to this. That we never use the word compete, right? We use the words contribute. And there were a lot of ways that you can contribute during this sort of situation. You could go in it and try to prevent the disease through vaccine technology. You could try to treat the symptoms of the disease once people have it, right? And I think what our CEO was adamant about was trying to contribute anywhere we could. So and this is specific to the vaccine,
right?
We didn't really know what kind of vaccine technology we were going to go with. And let me try to explain that a little further. There's many different types of vaccine technology. You can, there's things such as what I would call live attenuated viruses. There is inactive viruses, there's viral vectors, and then there's this new technology that we went with, which was mRNA, right? When we were talking about contributing, the question is your population in the world is 7.5 to 8 billion people, right? We didn't want to just contribute in the Western world. We didn't want to just contribute 10 million doses or 100 million. We specifically were driving ourselves towards really, changing the entire paradigm of how you do this. So the point I'm trying to make is, when you were asking the original question, Scott, is in the first quarter of 2020, we didn't really know what technology we were going with. And then it was our CEO working with another company by the name of BioNTech, where we first struck a deal with them for what we thought was this breakthrough technology that didn't allow you to just have 50 million, 100 million doses. You could have billions of doses, right? That was the big
which would support,
the world.
And
many people as you could in the world. Correct.
Right. And your desire to really not just make a small dent in the universe, but change the paradigm, as you put it, Jim, right?
Exactly. So, you're dealing, let's remember, you're dealing with a worldwide health crisis. You're dealing with something that was spreading around the world exceptionally rapid. And you just needed a breakthrough technology in order to do this. So we bet on this new mRNA vaccine technology, and we bet that technology probably in the March of 2020 timeframe. And we bet at that time that we were going to hopefully try to get something on the market, but be able to scale it for billions of doses. So as we were going through that, we were, with our BioNTech partner, and, we saw our phase 1, phase 2 trials in April and in May. We selected a final candidate dose in actually July. By the way, we had 42,000 patients in the clinical trial.
Right.
A big clinical trial, maybe 1,000. This is 42,000.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And in a short amount of time as well.
Short amount of time. And it was the most diverse trial we've ever, conducted, right? From a female, male, cultural perspective all around the world, right? And to make a long story short, we went through our phase 2, phase 3, and it was in sort of the November timeframe, where we unveiled all of our phase 3 trials, and that's where we sort of knew we had a winner. Now, all in that parallel time, from March until November, our team had just about every night was sleepless because we had to build a supply chain for billions of doses using a technology that we had never used before. And let me put it into maybe one more perspective, and
okay.
and then I'll let you sort of, ask me, some other thoughts. But the number one vaccine at the time within Pfizer is a product called Prevnar. So in 2019, we produced 200 million doses, 200 million. In 2021, we produced just over 2 billion doses. And in 2022, all things being equal, we'll produce roughly around 3.5 billion doses. Wow. So the amount of scale that we went to based on this bet of the mRNA was, was probably the greatest manufacturing feat since probably Henry Ford and the, Ford production system.
Jim, there's Kelly, I don't know about you, but my mind is racing with different aspects of this story, and we're just kind of getting out of the gate here. Yeah. But Kelly, I'll give you a chance to respond to what Jim just shared with us.
Sure. So I guess the first thing that comes to mind, given what we've discussed, is that, Jim, you started with us really kind of talking about how each person comes to work every day or turns on their laptop every day, knowing a patient, right? Sort of that singular motivating drive to want to make a contribution, and to scale from that to the billions of doses, right? And reproducing the vaccine on that scale. That's an amazing thing. If you can connect sort of the detailed personal connection with that larger mission. What I would love to know about, because I remember this window of time that you're talking about, this was sort of when everybody else was discovering supply chain for the first time. And there was a lot of discussion around how cold it was going to have to be, right? So people are learning about cold chain logistics. And I would love to know anything that you're able to share about how your team was receiving new information during that time between, I think you said, March and November, when I'm sure things were relatively fluid because everyone was moving so fast, trying to build a supply chain for sort of a moving target. What was that time like for you and your team?
Yeah, here's the best way to sort of describe this. We optimized on volume. How much volume can we, what is the patient population we could hit? right? And which is one of the reasons why, and again, I credit our CEO for this our vaccine scientists, is we knew the mRNA technology, and I can get into a little bit about what that is, but what that basically fundamentally is software code. So Pfizer became a software provider overnight, because what you do is that you take a piece of the DNA software out of the spike protein, you transcript that into RNA, and then you replicate the RNA, right? And I'm not a virologist, I'm not a scientist.
That makes three of us. I think I can safely say that, Jim.
But what it allows you to do is exceptionally efficient to grow large scale, right? Here's the challenge with RNA, which I think you're getting at, Kelly, is RNA doesn't like heat. Right. So like the analogy I always use is, if you cut an apple and you leave it on your counter, you cut a banana and leave it on your counter, you come back an hour later, it's browned out. Well, if you take a piece of RNA and you leave it on your counter, if you could do such a thing, it would brown out in about 2 nanoseconds. So when we were looking at the fact that if we were going to manufacture this for speed and scale, is we would have to go out with a deep frozen, and it was -80 to -90 Celsius.
Wow.
And you remember, right, in the first quarter of 2020, even into the second quarter, most people were stating it couldn't be done or it was stupid to be done.
Right.
Right. So that was another big bet and a big, another big, what I would call bravery moment inside of Pfizer, because what happened is we could have gone out with perhaps let's call it less cold version, maybe something that's not at -90, maybe it's -20, maybe it's 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. But that would take time.
Right.
We'd have to reformulate. You'd have to put perhaps preservatives. There's different things you may have to do. And again, I'm not a chemistry virologist, right? But we optimized on speed, and we said to ourselves, if we can get this thing out, which we ended up, as getting it out in 10 months, which, by the way, the previous world record was around 10 years for a vaccine.
Unbelievable.
Right? Now, maybe I should correct myself. I think Ebola, I think the Merck, which I have a great degree of respect from, I think they got theirs out in about 3 to 4 years, but this was 9 months, right?
Right. So
if we were going to go out with something that, cold chain, non-cold chain, it would have taken us a lot longer. And then what happens when you delay therapies, the critical patients, lives are impacted. That's fundamentally what it is. So.
All right. So much talk about so little time. And Kelly, we're going to make sure Jim has an opportunity to speak to any other, operational hurdles that came with this massive, game-changing, world-changing mission. I mean, there's no different way. That might sound dramatic, but it really, lives were on the line and things were being done in a way and in a fashion that had never been done before. But I want to go all the way back to where you started your response there, Jim. You talked about that you and the team wanted to contribute, not compete, and that's one of my favorite parts about what we saw during the pandemic is we saw companies that were fierce competitors work together to serve humanity. And that's going to stick with us for a long time. And that's how we were able to working together to achieve and really make sure that the vaccine was widely available, right? Beyond the science behind it, because I can tell you, Miss Beckham, hopefully you're not listening, but I was not the chemistry A student. So Jim, thank you for putting it in terms that most of us can approach. One other thing I think it's really important not to get lost in the shuffle is the 42,000 folks that were part of the trials, right? To mitigate the risk and to make sure it was safe for everybody. Jim, you even said it. 1,000 people make up a lot of those trials. 42,000. Kelly, can you imagine the data? We talk about big data. Can you imagine what had to be accomplished there, right? To get that in the right hands so the right decisions were made, we can move forward. And all of this, these are just a couple of little tidbits, all this being done in that with the backdrop that was 2020 and 2021. I mean, this is like fascinating stuff that businesses will be studying for decades to come. So Kelly, I want to give you a chance to comment on kind of what we were just what I was just sharing there, and then I want to get back and talk any other operational hurdles that Jim wants to share with us. Kelly, your thoughts?
Sure. No, I think it was a great unifying moment, right? It was like everyone had a role to play. Obviously, you and your team at Pfizer and the partners that you cooperated with, but it allowed certainly people watching from home to learn the power of supply chain even beyond this particular instance. But then all the people, Scott, that you mentioned that were part of the trials and were simply willing to be part of the solution. It really was an incredible unifying moment that I think the world needed against the backdrop of some very difficult circumstances.
Well said, Kelly. Well said. You know, we've got friends at UPS and FedEx, and to hear both leaders from both organizations mentioning each other's company names in the same conversations, that's unheard. You know, that stuff doesn't take place. That doesn't happen. And this is one silver lining that's going to stick with all of us for quite some time. Okay. So, Jim, I want to give you a chance to weigh in. There's a couple of things we want to chat with you about, but any other operational hurdles and how the team was able to overcome them that you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, there was like four main things we were really working on, Scott. One is, we had to certainly build out a manufacturing process for billions. We had to build out a network. And it wasn't just steel, stainless steel. It was a network of, providers, as you said. You said UPS, FedEx, many different logistics providers around the world, many different suppliers around the world, right? Many governments cooperated. I mean, unbelievable collaboration and cooperation with just about every government that we had gone to. So we were really successful in pulling together what I would classify as, a mosaic of partners in order to really get this job done. And the great thing that we were able to do is, really do this at the speed of science. That's really what we're up against, is the speed of science. So we talk about supply chain. The speed of science dictated our supply chain, and let me tell you, everything that we were doing, inside of Pfizer at the time is, trying to do this in what we called light speed. That's really what we were doing. Yep.
Well said, Jim. Being able to operate at the speed of science and have the operational execution to enable that is a intriguing part of this story. Kelly. Really quick, there was a great Harvard Business Review article we were talking about earlier today with Greg White and Kevin L. Jackson, and it talked about how technology and supply chain, it's really technology is driving highly evolving relationships and partnerships in global supply chain. That's kind of what Jim's speaking to, is what you and I were speaking to a minute ago, and it's remarkable what good that will do for consumers and markets alike. One final thing before I turn over to Kelly, kind of going down the innovation path. Jim, I want to ask you about esprit de corps. As we have interviewed countless supply chain leaders from other organizations that were involved in different ways in the noble mission to protect humanity, whether it's vaccine related or related in other activities. Time and time again, Kelly, I remember a couple of our interviews we did together. Folks would stop in the tracks and tell their leaders how this is different. This is I've got a whole new levels of purpose in what I do. And the esprit de corps and the camaraderie that came out of that was just, those are some of my favorite stories. Jim, speak to that and what you saw happen amongst the Pfizer team as you went down and fulfilled this noble mission.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, focusing on the patient. Everybody knows a patient, right? And, that patient may have a healthcare challenge for one reason or another. What COVID did was COVID sort of said, wait, we have a pandemic. So 7.7 billion people in the world could be impacted. So, that was a great sort of gravity force for everybody in Pfizer. I think the other thing too is just, again, we're headquartered in New York City, and my God, the first quarter of 2020 in New York City was just tragic, just to walk around and to see what was happening. And then, people were losing family members. There was a lot of different emotional things that were occurring all over that really made this, the great sort of forcing mechanism for everybody at Pfizer, all 78,000 colleagues of ours. And everybody had some contribution. Even if you weren't part of the COVID vaccine, your job was to keep the base business running. Operating rooms still needed to occur, right? Hospital areas, doctors, pediatricians, all the frontline workers, that kept going. So, it's not like we were fortunate to sort of say, well, let's put the entire company behind, the vaccine and then we'll stop everything else. No, that's not what we could do. We had to do both things at the same time, so.
Remarkable. Kelly Barner, I tell you, I wish we had several hours and hours with Jim and the team because of, I can only imagine the book that could be written related to this mission. But Kelly, where are we going next with Jim?
So we're actually going to find out how all of the things that we've talked about up to this point continue today and into the future. So, Jim, you've talked about the innovative potential that already existed within the ranks at Pfizer and how that was accelerated so that you could, I think you said, move at the speed of science. You were working at light speed. You talked about how has that momentum around innovation continued to shape not only your team and your organization, but also what you can achieve going into the future?
Yeah. So Kelly, it has forced us, light speed and the light speed thinking has forced us to say, why can't we do this for everything? I want to give a little bit of just context. During this whole project, our corporation, and I can tell you, the corporation in my particular situation, they never said no. We put billions of dollars at risk. Walls were broken down. It was okay not being in a conversation. It broke down the entire paradigm of governance and how you should do things, right? So now the question is, now that we've done this for a product, and by the way, we've also, it doesn't get as much sort of focus, but we also had a second Lightspeed project for a product we call Paxlovid. Right. So that is an oral antiviral medicine. It was also brought to the market in world record time. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to say, well, if we can bring a vaccine to market in 9 months, 10 months, why can't we do this for everything? Because at the end of the day, patients are waiting. Right. Yeah. That's really the way that it's really fundamentally shifted the entire thinking at Pfizer.
Yeah.
Kelly, I love that question. Why can't we do this for everything? I mean, that is going to be one of my favorite takeaways from this conversation. Your thoughts, Kelly?
Well, and it's funny, Scott, because what I actually thought of as Jim was sharing that was Amanda. I know your wife, Amanda, has lots of inspirational quotes in the kitchen for you and the kids. And what the little plaque in my kitchen says, what would you try if you knew you could not fail? And that's a cute home kitchen witticism, but for Pfizer to do that as a global organization, that's an entirely different lift. And I have to think from a mindset standpoint and a risk tolerance standpoint, like you said, it completely broke down the paradigm and allowed you to rebuild it in a way that I'm sure we'll be seeing positive echoes from for years and years and years.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Agreed. And I like that phrase. I'm going to have to steal that one too. What would you try if you certainly could not fail? We'll have to revisit that, Kelly. All right. So we're going to shift gears as we're coming down the home stretch with Jim Cafone from Pfizer. Kelly, what's one of the last couple of questions we're going to pick his brain on?
We're actually going to kind of stay in a similarly spirited place. So, Jim, given everything that you've seen and experienced and all the lessons you and your team have learned, if you were speaking to someone that were early in their career in supply chain or who had recently shifted from another function to work into supply chain, what advice would you offer them?
The first thing I always like to say to anybody that's young, first starting out in their career, is find your purpose and go work for a company that hopefully shares that same purpose. Okay. You don't have to work in healthcare. There's plenty of supply chains for water, food, anything you can to contribute to society, right? So it's really finding your own personal purpose, your personal mission. Now, that's difficult at times for young, graduates. So what I always say is that don't sweat that out too much either, because you can't really make a wrong decision in supply chain. Supply chain is a horizontal science. It's not a vertical science. Now, there's probably a lot of experts that would disagree with me on that, but supply chain is a systems engineering world, right? You're bringing together all sorts of people and you're building that mosaic tile that I showed earlier. So try everything out, and sooner or later you'll find an organization or something you're doing that fits the purpose that you want to do. But don't expect it the first time out or the second job or the third job. Yeah. You just have to continue to keep trying it. And it's one of the things that's kept me in healthcare. I talked to a young student the other day that just got a position with a water company that's, building filtration units for the emerging markets. I mean, there's nothing better than water. If you think you need a vaccine, the first thing you need when you wake up is water. So right. There's a lot of different things that people can do, but stay true to your purpose and, accept the fact that it's going to take you a little bit of time to do that. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, because at the end of the day, supply chain to some degree is supply chain.
I think that's a fair add. I like the fact that you're saying give it some time, be on the lookout for your purpose, but don't expect it to be sitting on your desk your first day on the job, because it takes time. I know from my own journey, you slowly figure out how all these systems come together and operate. And so you may not even realize the total reach of the supply chain that you're contributing to until you've really kind of absorbed how it all works together. So I think that's a great piece of advice, and I hope people take it.
Agreed. And I like your thought there. It would be nice in this life if you could show up on Monday morning at your desk and your purpose be sitting there with a bow on top. I know. It'd make it so much easier, wouldn't it?
And hot coffee.
Time.
What's that, Jim?
I said it takes time. Look, I'm an engineer, and I never thought I'd ever work at a pharmaceutical company. And I wanted to go work in automotive. And, I did for a while. But, through many zigzags through your career, you find healthcare. That was me. Other people is different. So, yeah, it takes time. And that's okay. There's half the time the fun is in the journey, not in the destination, right?
Completely agree. Beautiful point to kind of wrap up today's conversation with. Really do, we've seen so much, and I try not to be cliche over the last couple of years. Consumers have seen so much. Consumers have really learned so much more about industry. And let's face it, some things just didn't work out. We've talked a lot about some of the breaks in supply chain, different products. If you go in your local grocery store, there's no shortage of stories there. But Jim, really do appreciate what you and the Pfizer team and all the folks that made up the Noble Mission. They told a much different story and educated and informed global consumers around why it's so important to be able to do what we do in supply chain. And of course, just the front end of that, the pharmaceutical story there is fascinating. That's just another chapter to the story. So thank you for what you and the team continue to do, and appreciate your time here today. All right, one final question. Two final questions. First off, Jim and Kelly. Kelly's got it good. She's in Boston. Kelly, I believe you're a Patriots fan. Y'all have been spoiled, right? Trophy after trophy. I'm in Atlanta, Jim. So the Falcons have had opportunities, but we're kind of going through a tough rebuild. So, Jim, that brings me to a little fun question here. Are the Jets going to make the playoffs this year? Do you want to offer up a fearless prediction?
Well, as a Jet fan, we always like to say they will, but we know deep down that it's always a tough way. It takes some real true bleeding green to convince yourself that you may not make it, but that's okay. We go to every game, and we always support the team.
I love it. Well, hey, we're all pulling for a return. Wasn't Vinny Testaverde leading the Jets during one of their playoff runs years ago? But we'll see how it plays out. I'm glad. I think we're all glad football is just about back with us. Finally, if folks want to, connect with you, learn more about this fascinating story that, we scratched the surface on here today, or if they want to learn more about different elements of the Pfizer story, some of the other things you mentioned, what's the easiest way folks can learn more?
There's a couple of ways. So first of all, you could just go to Pfizer.com. A lot of what I said is already out there. Secondarily, there's a really interesting book that describes the entire vaccine story of Pfizer. It's called Moonshot, right? And that was written by our CEO, and he describes basically this entire story. So it's Moonshot. Our CEO's last name is Bourla, Bourla. You can Google it, Amazon it. It's a great read. Or you could certainly get a hold of me through LinkedIn, email, any way, to do that. And like all of us at Pfizer, we're really here for patients. So, anything we can do to help humanity in that way, we're always willing to do. So.
Love that. Jim Cafone, Vice President, Pfizer Global Supply Chain. I got to tell you, Jim, thank you for your time, first off.
Thank you. It was great being here.
And
I could have talked to you all afternoon, too. I agree with you.
So much more. We'll have to have you back. But, hey, the automotive industry is lost, but certainly healthcare is gained. So I'm glad that you found your purpose when you did, and just amazed at what you and the team have accomplished. So thanks so much for joining us here, Jim. While we still have Jim, Kelly Barner, right before I wrap here, I'd love to hear your favorite takeaway from what Jim has shared here today.
I think my favorite takeaway was, and Jim, you can correct me on the wording, but you talked about brave moments, I believe was the word that you used earlier. It's easy for all of us to sit here today and talk back over the last 2 years and remember that it was real. I'm glad you took us back to what it felt like in March of 2020, Jim, because I think as a humanity, we're wired to try to get back to some level of stability and normal. But the decisions that were being made and the unknowns that the world was dealing with, those were very scary decisions that had to be made. And just thinking about the shift of risk tolerance and keeping the eye on the ball, I think that Moonshot is a great title for a book, understanding what was at stake and sort of making sure that the risk tolerance changed correspondingly. That is something that never ceases to amaze me. And I think it's good for all of us to be reminded on occasion just how uncertain it all was, but we still got to this moment that we're at now.
Beautifully said, Kelly. 1,000%. I know that's not a mathematical possibility, but I agree with you wholeheartedly in what you just shared there, Kelly Barner. Appreciate what you do here and at Dial P for procurement, art of procurement, you name it, buyer's meeting point. So big thanks for what you do, and thanks for being here. So to our listeners, hey, one heck of a story. Goodness gracious. And we're just scratching the surface. So as Jim suggested, check out those follow-up resources. Check out the book, Moonshot, and learn more at Pfizer.com. Big thanks once again to Jim Cafone with Pfizer. Big thanks to my dear friend Kelly Barner with the Supply Chain Now team and Dial P for procurement. Make sure you look that up wherever you get your podcast from. But listeners, whatever you do, gosh, there's so many takeaways. I got about 17 pages of notes from what Jim shared here today. But take action. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And with that said, we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.